Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast. Today's guest is Jason Valenti, the co-founder of Astrix AI. Astrix is an adaptive learning platform for professional level exams. And the first exam that they're focusing on is the Chartered Financial Analyst or CFA1 exam. In this episode, we discuss how the platform works, why Jason is tackling this problem, and the importance of pivoting and how the LLM boom has influenced how they build a moat and future-proof this business. We discuss so many more things in this episode. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. Enjoy the show. Hey Jason, thanks for joining me today. To dive right into it, can you tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Well, great to be here, Byron. Thanks so much for having me. I'm the co-founder of Astrix AI, which essentially is a fully adaptive learning platform. And we focus on professional level exams. So basically, at the moment, what we're focusing on is the Chartered Financial Analyst or CFA Level 1 exam. And within the kind of exam preparation space, there's quite a few different components. So there's notes, there's videos, lectures, etc. But where we really focus on is that kind of phase once you've gone through the notes and you're ready to start actively practicing questions and testing yourself and getting feedback and then iterating on that. So that kind of learning feedback loop, that's really where we focus on now. So, and what I mean by a fully adaptive learning platform, essentially what we're doing is generating very individualized and targeted questions to help save students time when they're preparing.
Great. And just for a bit of more context, in terms of individualized, do you mean the tests are sort of changed and developed depending on how you performed in your last practice test? So you're focusing on your weaknesses?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess with adaptive learning, the idea is that you kind of progress over time. So what we do is you generally start with more of a foundational knowledge, and in that case, you get given questions that are more foundational. And as you progress, we kind of keep track of your knowledge, and then we target certain areas where we feel you need to improve, but the difficulty also increases as you go. And so I suppose the key difference between adaptive learning and a different type of learning platform is that the questions are dynamic and they're individualized. And so what you see will be completely different to what someone else sees. And that's through essentially an algorithm that really targets what you should be kind of focusing on.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that context.
Yeah.
And what caused you to tackle this problem?
Yeah, I mean, if you had to ask me 10 years ago, I reckon exam preparation wouldn't have been on my radar at that stage. But you know what, I went through the journey of qualifying as an actuary. So I spent, 8 years of my life really, grinding hard through university and through the board exams. And quite honestly, it was a really, really tough journey, especially studying and working. I mean, it takes just an unreal amount of discipline and consistency and sacrifice of your time to day in and day out continuously, study while you're working. And so I think through that experience, I really felt that there was ways that students could be helped. And I'm very much someone who learns as by doing. And so that's why I think we focus more on the kind of learning feedback loop, because I think it's a really valuable way of learning. And I think when I was, 10 years ago, when I was going into actuarial science, I didn't even know that I was going to be studying board exams after university. I thought I was going to slug it out for 3 years and that was my degree and that's it. But, in my final year, I found out I had to do these board exams. And like I said, it was really, really tough. And I think, one of the turning points for me was when I was trying to get some feedback on an exam, and it was just really expensive and very difficult and very delayed to get that. And I think from that experience, I didn't really think too much about it. I was like, okay, let's try to do something about this. Let's give people the support and guidance that I feel like I didn't have.
That's so interesting, because there are obviously thousands of people who feel that exact pain point that you did. But
Yeah.
what do you think caused you to actually try and tackle it?
Quite honestly, I think that when I was in that period of studying and learning, I think it actually came from a period of frustration, right? Like I was trying to really go through this content and learn as much as possible. And I was doing everything I can, and I just felt like there wasn't any way to get that feedback and really iterate on it. And a lot of it, at least in my experience in terms of self-studying, is there's a lot of things that are quite inefficient. You have to ask a lot of different questions that you don't always connect the dots, and it takes a lot of work and effort to do that. I think when I got to the stage where I wanted to get that and it was very expensive, I didn't, like I said, I didn't actually think about it that much. I just, I said to myself, okay, this is something I feel like needs to be solved, because it was very, very frustrating for me.
And I'd like to unpack the sort of the differences between your product and the problem it solves and the actual problem. Like, what is the problem with the way students prepare for professional exams today?
So, I mean, I think it's, like with professional exams, they're really, really tough to pass. I mean, if you look at the pass rates, they are incredibly low. I know the actuarial exams can go down to like 25% pass rates. And so it's very difficult to pass these exams, which is a well-known fact. And that's why a lot of these learning platforms, which are professional, exam preparation platforms, are expensive, and you do get good money from them. But when you look at, the way that you need to practice for this subject, right, it really takes a different kind of practice. You can sit down and you can revise and you can learn for an hour, but how you spend that hour can be different, right? And one of the things that you really need to do when you get to these level exams is very deliberate practice. And what I mean by deliberate practice is you have to really focus and structure your session, in the sense that you have to try to understand, the areas that you missed out, or why you didn't understand this, or connect the dots, or, find out where in the textbook, you can get more information. And all these questions, they might seem like unimportant, like do people really care about that? But in order to really, increase your knowledge and to really get to the level that you need to get to, you have to have very deliberate practice. And when I looked at some of the, if I look at what's out there currently in terms of learning platforms, I don't necessarily feel that there's enough emphasis on that deliberate practice element of it. And I think the best way to kind of describe this and give you some context into how I think is if you give the analogy of, say, training for a marathon, right? So if you were training for a marathon, say 50 years ago, like what kind of tools did you have in order to prepare for a marathon, right? At that stage, you probably had, a stopwatch, right? So you'd run around the block and time yourself, and the next week you'd see, okay, I improved by 6 seconds. And if you compare it to how you prepare for a marathon now, it's like dramatically different, right? You get things like a Garmin or Apple Watch where you can track your heartbeat, you can track your stride, your distance covered, your progression over time, your elevation, everything, and these are all data points that you can use to refine your approach. And if you think about it, when you're studying for a really difficult exam, the way at least I feel about it is that there's lots of ways that you could do that to prepare for an exam. You can, and the current platforms, in my view, what they give you potentially is a general explanation, maybe an end grade of 50%, but it's really those unanswered questions that take a lot of time to unpack, right? And you have to really dig into it, and the process itself is very valuable for learning. I won't take away from that, but I do think there's technology and tools that could really aid that experience of, going back and understanding where you got wrong so that you can choose your next steps. And so really, I think a lot of people are essentially paying for a stopwatch, and we're aiming to give them a Garmin watch.
Right, that's a great analogy. And how long have you been working on Astrix for?
So I've been working on it right now for about 9 months, full time. Before that was, I would say in total I've been working on this for about 2 years. Yeah.
Wow. And were there any signals or anything like that that gave you the confidence that like you were the right person to try solve this problem,
Yeah.
or was it like you said you just didn't really think about it and just dove right in?
I mean, when I first started, obviously I was doing it part-time, so it was a lot easier to dive right in,
Yeah.
very, very different decision when you're deciding to dive right in and do it full-time. I think in terms of the confidence, one of the things that gave me a lot of confidence was actually getting through these board exams that I wrote and qualifying as an actuary. It definitely, it was a tough thing to get through, and I feel like after that I had done something that even myself at the beginning thought I wouldn't be able to do, and so I think that was a big part of my confidence. I've also never really been too scared of a challenge, so I think that kind of helped me in terms of being the right person or the only person to tackle this problem. I guess you can only really answer that if you have the benefit of hindsight, right? But what I can say is that, being a student that's gone through this journey and like really felt the pain points of it, as well as working in kind of the corporate landscape where you can see how technology and data can really help drive decision making. I think those things together, put me in a position that's, I suppose, fairly unique. And yeah, I'm just incredibly determined to solve this specific problem. And I do think that, we'll focus very, very heavily on how students experience this and how do we help students. And I think that change should come from a student, which is also why, I get a bit more confidence that, the unique value proposition that we'll have potentially against other platforms is that we're really putting the student first, and we're trying to see how we can guide them along their study journey.
Awesome. And so you mentioned you've been working on it for like 2 years now.
Yeah.
Have you had to pivot at all? Like, how different is the product now compared to when you first started?
Yeah, I mean, really, really interesting question. I think when we first started, obviously the idea was to go after professionals. I mean, that's where the problem was. And when we started to dig into it and dig into the problem, one of the biggest areas that we felt we needed to solve was, instantaneous feedback, right? That's what this whole thing is built on, is removing the bottlenecks that prevents instant feedback. And in order to do that, you had to solve some big technical problems, which required large language models at that stage, 2 years ago. And so we realized, okay, for, actuarial exams or CFA, it was just too big a task to try and do that for that kind of level of exam. So we actually decided to validate the concept through a high school in South Africa. And so we worked with them for a couple of months, and I suppose you could call that the first pivot. And once we went through that process and we gathered a lot of data, and we built some models that really had some amazing results, and it kind of validated the idea of what we wanted to build. And I think from there we started to look at how we turn, how do we turn this into, a startup, and how do we monetize that? And through a lot of conversations and testing the platform and understanding, that kind of environment better, we kind of, we didn't see a way to make a sustainable business, at least at that stage. And then ChatGPT came out, which was just like this massive, kind of explosion. And, before that, we were working a lot with language models. And at that stage, it wasn't really a hype or anything. People weren't talking a lot about language models. And I remember my co-founder at the time saying, I think next year is going to be like quite a big year for chatbots. And I was thinking, okay, chatbots, like chatbots they're kind of the worst experience ever. Like I never used a chatbot. But yeah, ChatGPT came out and it just really exploded. And at that stage, because we had kind of been playing in that space, we realized immediately, like it changes the landscape and what's possible, and what we're trying to do is people are going to be able to tackle this problem as well. And they have. So from there, we just try to speed up, our developments. And it kind of got to a stage last year where, again, there was more updates on, in the AI landscape. and it put us in a position where we felt we didn't have a unique enough product. Essentially, at that stage, what we had was like a quiz platform, right? But we felt it was quite easy to replicate, and so, towards the end of the last year, we decided to pivot. The main reason being we wanted to avoid competition in as much sense as possible. We also wanted to take on something that was a lot harder, which naturally avoids competition. And honestly, I think that the market's better suited for what we're trying to do, which is really trying to aid self-study and guide learners on their learning journey. And so that's where we landed, and I'm very, very comfortable and confident with the direction we're going in.
That's great. I think that really puts it into perspective, like the entrepreneurial journey, and like your first idea very often doesn't turn out to be the idea that you launch with. And out of curiosity, what has been the hardest part of the journey so far?
I mean, I think before I joined full-time, the toughest thing was to really try to keep the momentum of the project alive. When you have co-founders and yourself, working full-time and trying to do something on the side, it becomes really demanding, especially when there's a lot of development that needs to go into it. It wasn't like we could quickly just create a product and launch it and see how it goes. There was a lot of work that didn't have immediate benefits at that stage. So trying to keep the project moving was quite challenging, and finding the capacity between the founders to push the project along, that was tough. Since I've joined full time, I think, and since our new direction and the new product we're building, I think we really found our stride. And I guess the tricky part now is just trying to keep up pace, essentially, because AI is just such a fast moving space, as you know, and so there's always that pressure that you have to just try push as hard as you can all the time. And from that perspective, it can also be quite tough that you continuously have to think like, what's going to be released next, right? Like, is the next release going to make whatever I'm creating redundant? And so that kind of pressure, I think, is also difficult to work with, and it's required a lot of thinking.
Yeah, I can imagine. So did like ChatGPT and the introduction of other large language models have quite a big impact on you deciding to pick up the pace and like go into this full time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, when ChatGPT was launched, I think it was November 2 years ago, or whenever it was, you could immediately see like the space was going to get quite hot. And I just, midway through the year, I realized like we're not going to be able to keep up pace if three of us are working on this part time. And I loved working on this. It really was something I was super passionate about. And so those two reasons together kind of, it made me realize like, it feels like now or never. Do you know what I mean? It was like, either I do this and I give this a proper go, or we let this hobble along for another year, which wasn't ideal. And so, yeah, I made the call to jump in.
Great. And you mentioned that there's three of you working on this. How important is it to have like a team of you working on it rather than like just on your own, for example?
Yeah, well, it's vital, hey, in my opinion. I think so. So I've got the co-founder who's actually based in Australia. He's a data scientist, and so he's more focused on that kind of side of the project. And we really do have complementary skills within the team. And what I've started to notice is how different, how you can work with those different skills and different strengths and weaknesses. And yeah, in general, I think there's naturally periods where you can doubt, what you're doing, and you can hit a bit of a period where you start to question things and your energy levels go a bit down. And to have co-founders are hopefully not experiencing that at the exact same time, like it really does help to push the project along. So and it's also just a lot more fun, honestly. Like I'm working with co-founders that good friends with, and yeah, I just love it. It's really cool.
Great. And just going back to the AI bit and realizing that you guys needed to be a bit more, like build a bit more of a moat to actually get your product out there. What's your view and approach in the context of AI to like handling competition? How do you think about that?
I mean, the biggest question we have to ask ourselves is like what technology should we build and what technology should we leverage? Because I think what you can fall into now is if you decide to build certain things like your own internal models, right, or whatever models they may be, if you decide to build them, it takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of focus. And if it's not your unique selling proposition, then essentially you could be leveraging other technology. But the other problem, the flip side of that, is that if you're leveraging only other people's technology, then you've got a very replicable product, right? So there's definitely a balance between, what do you create your own and what do you leverage? Because if, for example, with an Astrix, we decided to now create an engine that converts text to images, right? That would be a significant amount of work to create. And would we be able to do it as good as someone who only focuses on text to image? Probably not. So you can spend a lot of time trying to develop something, and if it's not really going to be that selling factor or give you that unique edge, then the question is, should you be working on it? So really, it's just this balance between finding what is it that you're going to be really good at, and what are you going to be able to create that's your own IP and that is unique, and then what are you going to leverage, and making sure that what you're focusing on is your unique selling proposition, essentially.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when you first decided to work on this full time, were there any fears involved with taking that leap?
I mean, definitely. It was, at that stage, it was 9 months ago. I was about to sell. I was 29, but now I'm 30, so it hasn't really changed that much. Back in the day, no, it was 9 months ago. So, but the point I'm trying to make is, I had 6 years of experience, pretty starting to establish a decent career, gaining more responsibilities, and it just felt like a very different position to be in compared to straight out of varsity. There's just more responsibility, and in that sense, it kind of felt like you had more to kind of give up when you resign and you take on a completely different career path. And I think for a long time, for me, one of the things that I had to break was really like pinning my identity to being an actuary and working in that field. And it took a while for me to break that in a way. And I worked with some pretty amazing people. And I think by the stage when I got to, the decision of should I jump in or should I not, it was more a question of, okay, what do you want to do and what do you love and what do you believe in? And it was this project. And so I was willing to let go at least of the career aspect of it. I think some of the fears I had was obviously like financial, It's a lot more financial risk that you take on. But yeah, for me, it really did feel too important to just let it go. And I didn't want it to, I wanted to give it a proper go. So I made the leap.
And if you had to give advice to someone considering taking the leap, like they call you for a chat, let's have a beer. What is that? The advice that you would give them? Would you say like weigh up the options and see whether it's worth it and you're behind it, or what would you say?
It's a really good question. I mean, ideally, right, you'd want it to be reduce as much uncertainty as possible. So you'd want to time it perfectly that, as soon as you resign, you're getting traction and you're getting revenue and stuff. But I think, I don't know if there's ever that right time. At least for me, it didn't feel like there was going to be. And I think there's always going to be an element of, taking a leap and believing in it. But yeah, I think you try to give yourself as much stability as possible, for sure. And so, for example, I guess one of the things that I was fortunate to have is my qualification and experience going into this. And so, in a way, I view that as something that I will always have and I might be able to kind of lean on if I ever need it. But I would just say, the timing's probably never going to be right. If you believe in it enough and you've done your homework and you try to give yourself the most stability as possible and a little bit of a cushion, then go for it.
I think that's great advice. And what are you guys currently struggling with at the moment?
I would say, the classic startup issues, not enough resources, under pressure for time to get something out. So at the moment, it's just really a matter of capacity and trying to move at the speed that we need to move at. I think if you had to ask me that question 4 months ago, maybe a different answer. But at the moment, I feel really confident and comfortable in the direction we're going. And it's just a matter of, can we execute, within a decent time? And I think that's what we have to try find a balance in.
And you mentioned that your co-founder is on the other side of the world. So
yes.
How do you work on like creating that relationship and keep communication up with time zones being so different?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really tough. I think it's probably tougher for him because he's in Australia. So, a 9 a.m. meeting is probably like 7 o'clock in the evening for him. So I think he's had to sacrifice a lot more evening events than maybe I have. But it's really, really tough. I mean, we've met a couple of times in the 2 years face to face, and it's always just so refreshing to be in the same room and chat. And it feels like a different energy when you're in the same space. And it's very difficult to keep, I guess you could call it culture, right, between the three of us. But it's difficult to keep the fun in it when it's always business on virtual meetings. But we have a bit of banter at the start of the meetings for the first 10 minutes or so, and then we dig in. So we do what we can. I think, it's just everyone's just very, very committed. And I guess that shows by, the meetings just continuously happening, even virtually over 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you guys have like a certain approach to making progress? Like, do you have sprints or milestones that you have to hit so you're regularly making progress?
Yeah, I mean, it was really difficult when we were all doing it part-time, right?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, during those stages, your priorities are to do your work, and in the evenings, you just scrape out as much time as possible. And so during that period, it was difficult to maintain those milestones. But what we've got into now is a much more structured way where we have very defined milestones within, a couple weeks, months. And I'd say months is probably, at least for now, our kind of milestone duration. But yeah, we put those milestones in and we just graft as hard as we can to get there. And we know where we need to go. So we all just keep pushing. And I think, what we've realized is you have to have those milestones. I mean, if you don't, then it can just hobble along, and they're super important. So we try to structure it quite thoroughly right now, where we put very defined milestones and we just push to get there.
And are they comparatively ambitious milestones? Like, do you guys set a milestone where you're pushing yourselves harder than, like, say, an easier to attain one?
Definitely. I think we've given ourselves some pretty hectic milestones to reach. I think probably one of the biggest ones was, when we did a bit of a pivot last year and we decided to take on, again, come to professional exams. And I don't know if you've seen the amount of content in the CFA curriculum, but it's massive. I mean, it's it's a big one, and that's ambitious on its own, to try cover that. But to me, it's where it's needed. Professional exams is where it's needed, and it's not an easy one to solve. It's very, very difficult. There's like multiple things that you need to solve. Like equations, tables, graphs, theoretical, mathematical, statistics. It's just this wide range of all kinds of things. And so, like we decided that's what we need to do, and we went after it, and it's gone well. It's been tough, but I think that does really speak to our attitude of the fact that we, if we can do it and if we think that's the right thing, let's go after it. And working within the space from 2 years ago, and essentially at that stage, it was just an idea of like, hey, can you evaluate written responses and provide instant feedback? It was just an idea. We didn't really know, it would work or it would work at all. And what I've found over time is that I've usually tended to be a lot more positively surprised than at the results than, negatively surprised. And I'm usually like, kind of look at stuff and like, wow, that actually did quite well. And I think those types of things and the way things are progressing, it's like you do kind of get a sense of confidence that you can take it on. And so, yeah, we've kind of lent into that, and, CFA is probably been our most ambitious milestone to get to.
That's awesome. And in an ideal world, like, what do the next 5 years look like for Astrix?
So in the next 5 years, well, I guess the ambitions would be to expand beyond something like CFA. I think we'll start to look at multiple different board exams like actuarial, medicine, potentially even high school level SAT type standardized tests. And so I think we'll be able to expand into different areas and different levels of education. One of the areas that I really want to start to integrate into Astrix is actually preparing people for the working world, not only through the traditional education, but also through getting skills and experience applying that knowledge in the working world. And we've got some really interesting ideas there. And what I hope is essentially to get to this place where anyone who's studying for an exam gets access to this guided, adaptive learning experience. And we want to use these tools to essentially help people prepare for the working world.
That's awesome. That's really, really exciting. Just to switch gears a bit, out of interest, because I can imagine that Astrix is taking up a lot of your time. Are there any things in like your personal life that you're working on improving at the moment?
I mean, I really love working on this. And so it goes quite high on my priorities list right now. I think one of the things I'd actually like to do is just get a bit more structure in my day of carving out time to balance basically exercise and things like meditation, which at some stage I absolutely used to love. But I think at the moment trying to just get a bit more of a balance is something I am kind of looking towards. But it's not only because the work is a lot, it's also because I just actually love doing this. And I find myself kind of reducing the amount of time from bed to desk in the mornings. And it's Baron, like I did a lot of work, like before I resigned from Deloitte, I did a lot of work because at that stage, I wasn't extremely happy in my job. And I did have a period where, mentally it was quite tough. And I did the work at that stage to really understand what drives me. And I think that's helped me and put me in a much better like mental position currently. And so at the moment, I'm actually really enjoying working on this and working on something that I really believe in. So maybe finding a bit more balance of exercising more is something I'd work on, but overall pretty happy.
That's great to hear. I always like to hear that when people, like the things that founders are working on is what drives them and what they really enjoy. It's almost like a different type of balance. Like it doesn't feel like work. From the conversations I've had to a lot of founders, like when it doesn't feel like work, there's the opportunity or possibility of burnout isn't as high because you don't consider it like a chore. It's just you said, you're minimizing the time from bed to desk because you just love it. And so you're never thinking that you're grinding or anything like that, which I feel is amazing and a great place to be.
I mean, it's such a refreshing feeling. Like before this, I didn't necessarily have that same experience, and it definitely drains your battery quicker when when it's feeling like a lot more of a grind. Very, very, very grateful to feel like that.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
Before I end every conversation, I usually ask my guests if they have a question for me.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, maybe something I'm interested in is I've been following your journey on the podcast and absolutely love it. I think it's really, really great. So I have a similar question for you in the sense, what was the turning point for you to ultimately start this and yeah, where was the thinking there?
Yeah, it was kind of like a self-identity issue, because I think we had a discussion before this call where you can relate somewhat, where I was coming up with ideas, wanting to do things, but I wasn't following through with them. And so when I'd had discussions with people after the fact and I told them this idea, they follow up and they're like, what's happening with that? And I wasn't doing anything. And it started getting really frustrating. And like, I started reflecting and being like, am I that guy who just says things and doesn't do them? And so this podcast is one of those ideas. And I just decided that it needed to be one of the things I do. And I could take a meta approach to it and speak to people like yourself and learn in the process. So that is how I came up with the topic of the podcast. But yeah, the motivation was to just start something, because I also felt like I wasn't speaking about topics that I enjoy as frequently as I'd like. And I wanted to improve my speaking and that type of thing. And so, yeah, it was kind of like the perfect storm to just do it. Like you said, it's never going to be the right time. You can't just wait for things to just fall into place. And so, yeah, it's just been great so far. And I'm like 44 episodes in now. So we're coming up to a year soon. But yeah, really enjoying it. And I think it's also just a great way to get to speak to people. Like, we've known each other for a long time, but we've never had a long conversation like this and spoken about what we're working on. And I feel like these types of intentionally focused conversations are really great for, one, like building my network, but two, just like creating relationships with people. And so, yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it so far.
No, it's awesome. It's super grateful to be part of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for joining me today, Jason. I really appreciate it. And if people want to find out more about you and Astrix, where can they do so?
So you can email me, jason@astrix.ai, or visit our website, astrix.ai. Yeah, would love to hear from anyone and everyone who wants to reach out.
Great. Thanks again, Jason. Speak soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.